Hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's workshop. My name is Sarah Garibova, and I'm the Assistant Director for Outreach here at the Educational Resource Center. Tonight's workshop is the third in a series that is targeted directly towards master's students. So the first workshop covered time management and balancing your academic and your personal priorities. The second workshop in the series dealt with navigating criticism and developing a sense of resilience in your programs. And our topic tonight is owning your student identity while crafting your professional identity. I need to give you the caveat that I am not a career counselor. I come to tonight's workshop as an educator. So my goal for this evening is to help you reflect on your educational experiences and to begin to develop some language so that you can convey that experience out to potential employers in the industries that you want to join after you graduate. The challenge with master's programs is that they are so short, and I'm sure that several of you in the room are going to be graduating this spring. So it's a very condensed period in your life, and one in which you have to sort of glean the lessons as quickly as possible and form yourselves as quickly as possible in order to go out into the world and pursue the next steps in your careers. So today's session is going to give you plenty of opportunities to reflect individually and to sort of take stock of your experiences so far, and then to share those experiences and those reflections with your colleagues and your neighbors in the room. So to get that process started, I'd like to ask you guys to introduce yourselves to each other. If you could share your names and which program you're in, and then say a little bit about one goal that you would like to focus on in the coming semester that may be related to your future career plans or something else entirely. So take a few minutes, get acquainted, because we're going to be talking to each other quite a bit this evening. All right, so coming back together, I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of how tonight's workshop is going to unfold. The first thing we're going to do is to take stock of what is your student identity currently? What does it mean to you in the present moment while you're still in graduate school? And then the next thing we're going to do is to start thinking about that transition and thinking about how your student identity can undergird your future professional identity. And you'll find, I think, maybe to your surprise, that your student identity is not something completely separate or removed from that future professional self. They will interweave and inform each other in some really interesting ways. So that's why it's so important to take the time to assess where you're at currently and how that fits into your future. So to get started, let's start with that first question. What does your student identity mean to you at the present moment? Do you even feel like you have a student identity? It can be a bit of a challenge, especially as a master's student who's probably just arrived at BU and is leaving in a very relatively short period of time. I want to clarify what I don't mean by a student identity. I'm not referring to whether you're an A student or how you compare to other people in your program. That's not what I'm getting at. What I want you to focus on is your unique characteristics as an individual in an educational context. And as graduate students, your student identity can take on a few different manifestations. You are a student, you are a learner, but perhaps you're also taking on roles such as being a researcher or an educator. So think about what distinguishes you in those contexts. And then I'd also like you to think about the values and the traits and the motivations that led you to go into graduate school in the first place. What made you make that decision in your life? And then have those values or traits shifted at all over the course of your graduate careers? So take a few minutes and think about this as individuals and jot down some notes on your note cards. All right, and then we will discuss those together. So once you feel that you've gotten down some preliminary thoughts on these questions, I'd like to invite you to turn to your neighbors and to share what you've collected, the information you've gathered on yourself so far. So coming back together, we'll regroup. One particularly helpful way of thinking about your graduate student self, your graduate student identity, is to think about the different hats that you wear on a day-to-day basis. I already sort of alluded to this, but I want to dig into it a little bit deeper. To successfully navigate graduate school, you have to be a really invested student and a lifelong learner and have that as sort of a core value for yourself. As I mentioned, you might also be taking on aspects of a researcher's identity, going to conferences, producing publications. You might also be taking on internships and practicums where you actually leave the university and go work outside and gain experience there. And then some of you will also be taking on the role of an educator, perhaps serving as a course grader or a conversation facilitator. All of these components contribute to who you are as students, but they're also building a foundation for your future professional careers. They have a professional component already built into them. And of course, all of these roles are in addition to the hats you wear in your families and in your communities. So already off the bat, you can write on your resumes that you're experienced multitaskers. I have every confidence in that. For example, if you're a researcher and involved in research here at the university, you're a member of a lab. You're contributing to that endeavor, that work environment. If you're thinking of going into something more entrepreneurial after you graduate, perhaps you're already building a network outside of the university, building collaborations that will then undergird your future professional lives. So by balancing this student identity where you're still attending classes and still taking exams, and yet stepping out a little bit into the professional world, you're building a current self, and you're also creating that foundation for your future possible selves. So keeping those multiple hats and those multiple roles in mind, what I'd like you to do is to reflect on those a little bit more for yourself. Think about the hats that you wear, and then think about which one is your favorite, which one really lights up your day and makes you feel the most invested and the most fulfilled. And then start thinking about, why is that the case? Why does that one appeal to me the most? Now, if you say that, I just love being a student and I'm a lifelong learner, that creates some anxiety for some people because they don't see how that can be turned into a viable career path. But I promise you, we're gonna get there. So if that's your answer, stick with it and reflect on it a little bit. All right? So take a few more minutes and think about the roles that you play currently and which ones are the most fulfilling for you. So coming back as a group, if you had asked me when I was a graduate student which roles were my most fulfilling and most meaningful, I would have said that I'm a good writer. I love writing. And I also would have said I'm a good teacher. I really enjoy working with students. And that was the vocabulary that I had at that point in my life to describe what my interests and my skills were. So, that worked within the higher education context. Everybody knew what was involved in writing, and everybody knew what was involved in teaching. I didn't have to sort of break that down for myself or break it down for other people. So eventually, those easy days of just calling myself a good writer and a good teacher came to an end when I decided to pursue a career path that was outside of the traditional faculty role. So suddenly I got thrown into the cauldron of trying to redefine, well, who am I if I'm not a writer and I'm no longer a teacher? So I went through a pretty serious process of developing some self-knowledge. And that bit of self-reflection required that I really tap into some self-awareness, that I take some serious stock of what were my personal interests, and then that I also readjust what were my hopes and dreams for the future. And eventually that whole process congealed into a bit of self-knowledge. I'm still working on it. We're all works in process. So what did I do with that factoid about myself that I liked writing? Well, after I thought about it some more, I realized, okay, sitting in front of the computer for 6 hours a day, tapping away at some plastic keys, that's really not what I meant when I said I liked writing. And I also, never fully overcame writer's block or that sense of procrastination when faced with a big deadline. That never went away. What I actually meant when I said I liked writing was I liked finding the structure for the information that I wanted to convey. And I liked finding just the right words to convey those ideas to my audience. And those were some actual marketable skills that I could then tell potential employers about and say, hey, this is who I am and this is what I can bring to the table. So that translated eventually for me. And I went through a similar process with what did teaching mean to me. Again, teaching involves finding structure and information, but it also involves creating a long-term plan. You think about a 15-week course and planning out the syllabus and the work that goes into that. You have to identify what are my learning goals, and then what's the content I'm going to use to actually achieve those goals. So again, I had to reframe and I had to find a new language to describe what I was actually competent at. It was never a question of lacking experience or lacking skills. It was just, how did I present that to the world? All right? So I want you to start thinking about what is the language I'm going to use and what are the skills that I actually want to carry with me out into my professional career. So we're going to ask you to start connecting the dots a little bit. I'd like you to go back to those roles that you identified for yourselves and to start thinking about what are the actual processes or tasks involved in being a researcher or involved in being a good intern. And what about those do you get lost in, where you could just spend hours working on something and not even notice the time passing? So take a few minutes and think about that for yourself and think about the kinds of work you've already done that are the most rewarding for you. And then we'll come back together. So once you feel like you've identified 2 to 3 processes or tasks that you really enjoy, I would invite you to share that with your neighbors and compare notes a little bit. See if there's some commonalities in what you enjoy doing, or maybe you can give each other some new ideas to add to your sort of working inventory. At this point, hopefully you have a working inventory of what are some of your unique characteristics and your core values, and also what are some defining experiences and roles that you have held as graduate students and the aptitudes that have come out of fulfilling and meeting those roles. These are the raw materials that you're going to need to start crafting a professional identity and a professional narrative for yourself. And when you start writing resumes and cover letters, these are the kinds of questions that you're going to have to answer. Sometimes they're explicitly asked and you have to explicitly answer. And other times, these are the implied questions, the unwritten questions that you really need to have the answers in the back of your head, but you may never have to answer directly. These questions, when I first started my job search process after graduate school, terrified me. I had no idea how to answer them because they were so abstract and so removed from any of the content that I had really deeply invested myself in. It took that long process of self-reflection to be able to find those answers to these questions. Now, obviously, you can't start and finish a process of self-reflection in a matter of an hour and a half on one evening in the middle of a week right before finals. That's not possible. But what I would like to do today is to hope that I have launched you into that process of self-reflection. And hopefully you'll be able to give it some time and some thought in the coming weeks and in the coming months. Now, self-reflection can be fun, usually on a beach in the middle of the summer. That's the best place to think about life. But when your future career and your future livelihood is sort of riding on the outcome of that process, it can start to produce a bit of anxiety and a little bit of existential crisis. So I want to reassure you that you already have what it takes to succeed. And if you don't believe me, take a look at these graduate student characteristics. These are the traits and the aptitudes that are most valued by employers in the employees who have a graduate degree, a master's degree, or a doctoral degree. The fact that you've gone through graduate school means you have project management skills. If you've written a thesis, you know how to handle something that stretches over multiple months and break it down into smaller, manageable chunks of work. You also know how to navigate the world with minimal supervision. You don't need a lot of hand-holding. And that's something that employers truly value in their employees. A tolerance for ambiguity. That's a huge one for people that have been through a graduate program. There's often very little guidance, sometimes conflicting advice, and you've figured out how to navigate that because you've been through graduate school. So take a little heart from these characteristics and draw on them as you're developing that professional narrative for yourself. Now, as you're searching for just the right words, there is often a bit of translation that needs to happen. A lot of times within the academy, within higher education, we're focused on the content. And we're using discipline-specific language and caring about discipline-specific issues. And when you step out into the broader workforce, there's a bit of translation that needs to happen, and you need to learn the lingo of the industry that you're trying to break into. So, places to find that lingo, places to find the words that you need to use. Professional organizations' websites. You can look at websites for professional development conferences. Blogs are also a really great place to find that information and to join that larger conversation that's going on in the industry that you want to be part of. This particular quote comes from a pharmacy blog, and it's describing some of the traits that are really important for a pharmacist. So the blogger is writing, regardless of practice setting, the professional identity of a pharmacist shares common features. We are all driven by the desire to promote and support the safe, effective, and rational use of medications. This is just as important to the PGY2 trained, decentralized pharmacist as it is to the dispensing community pharmacist. So, using the microphones that are in the room, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Imagine that you were a pharmacy student getting ready to go out on the job market, and you read this blog. What sort of traits and what sort of characteristics might you want to highlight in your resumes and cover letters? Anyone have thoughts? If you could just raise your hand and then we'll bring a microphone over to you.
Okay, so I think it's always important to kind of express that you're still very motivated and that you have this like feeling of merit to what you're doing, and that I think shows that you are actually devoted to pursuing a career in a given field.
Yeah, good. That sense of drive, that sense of enthusiasm and investment is really important. Great. Other thoughts? Yeah.
So I had an interview just this afternoon, and one of the things that I did was like I told my interviewer about like this one problem that I was really passionate about that the industry was facing, and I think that really like struck a chord with them, and they were like, that strongly sort of like mirrors what I feel at the moment, and like we talked about how like the industry was facing a shift. I think that's like one great way to, you know, get across the fact that you are as invested as someone who's already in the industry.
Yep.
That could sort of give you the odds to beat the competition, whatever position it might be you are applying to.
Definitely. So
Yeah.
you were able to demonstrate your investment in the field,
Yeah.
that you'd already done the research.
The research, exactly.
And that
Yeah.
you're already up to speed and you're not going to have this huge learning curve. So
Yeah.
that was a fantastic strategy
Yeah.
to go in and have something that you really care about and that this other person likely cares about too.
Mhm.
Yeah, wonderful. Keep my fingers crossed for you on the interview. Other thoughts, other reflections on how this piece could inform someone who's applying to a pharmacist position straight out of school? Well, even if your discipline isn't pharmacy, you can go do that research and find out what's the talk, what are people caring about, what language are they using, what characteristics are they really looking for these days in this field that I want to work in. As you do that research, obviously you can't just copy and paste a complete and compelling professional narrative off of a website. It's really on you to find the language that's out there and match it to the experiences and the skills that you know are in you already. So it's a bit of a balance between finding the outside words and finding the internal experiences and matching them together. So for some graduate students, this process of transitioning from an exclusively student identity into a more professional identity comes very naturally. Their graduate programs set them up for it perfectly. The language that's used in their programs and then out in the industry are the same, and the transition is just seamless. For other people, especially those in disciplines where it's more content-based and there's less professional development, it's a harder and slower transition. But in either case, the obligation is really on you to do that self-reflection and to start thinking about how are you going to make that transition and build from everything you currently have in your life experience into where you want to be in 5 or 10 years. So in the months ahead, I would really encourage you to take some serious stock, do some serious reflection on your graduate experiences, the milestones and the achievements that you have accomplished while in graduate school. And then rather than just shrugging it off and say, well, of course I did that work, I had to, rather than just kind of ignoring the labor that went into that, to really dig deep and think about what did it take? What were the skills I used? What were the tools I used that helped me reach those milestones? And then once you've gathered that information about your present self, start thinking about how to translate that into language that your future employers will understand and be eager to hear about. All right? So on that note, I would like to open up the floor for questions, for discussion, and to hear more about what you discovered about yourselves during the conversation this evening. Questions or comments?
This is a comment.
Sure.
The list that you showed after we did our brainstorming
Yes.
of our
I
the
can go
different
back to that.
characteristics. Yeah, I thought that was a really great list, and I thought it was very validating for me because my list is much shorter that I created, but at the same time I look at this, I'm like, I do have all of that.
Yes, you do.
So that was just confirming for me, and also just a little bit like I guess motivating for me as well. Like I do have what I need as well. I just need to I guess apply to make sure that the employers see it too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I'll be happy to share these slides with you after the workshop today. Just make sure that you've written down your name and your email address, and I'll circulate those out tomorrow morning. My advice, or just one suggestion, I'm so glad that this list resonated with you and you could say, oh, I've got that. What I would suggest before you go into an interview is to go through and for each bullet point, have a story ready about how you demonstrated attention to detail or how your curiosity manifests and the things that you're most enthusiastic about. Have those stories in your back pocket ready to go, and you will be able to shine and to show off all of these competencies that you already have. Wonderful. Any other thoughts or comments or things that you wanted to share that came up in the discussion? Yeah. Wait for the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. So something I was thinking about as far as interviews goes, at least, because in a motivational letter, like, we can easily think about these things and write them down, but I feel like during an interview you have to be more flexible, right? And like, what are some, if there are any good recommendations on how to kind of prepare for that?
Yes. So you could prepare maybe the 50 most common interview questions, but the people that you actually meet the day of may not ask those exact questions. My advice would be to go ahead and prepare those 50 questions. Usually interviews are somewhat formulaic. You may not know the exact formula for that company or that office, but there's some general themes that cut across all industries, all offices. So do that preparation. But then also get comfortable being spontaneous. And that's where having conversations with your friends and with your family can be really helpful for just learning to have a casual conversation about who are you and what do you care about and what are you really enthusiastic about and why this particular job? Why do you want that job so badly? So make use of the people in your life and bounce ideas off of them to practice.
The idea of unpacking roles really resonated with me. Especially the writer part. I identify as a writer as well, and I thought that this is specific enough, but kind of looking at what aspects of writing are the most appealing to me was very useful advice.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that resonated. When I first started my job search process, if somebody had asked me, what do you know about strategic planning? I would have said, nothing. Absolutely nothing. But since I've begun my position here at Boston University, I found that my writing experience and my teaching experience fed into that really nicely. So be open to thinking creatively about how the things you like now can translate in other contexts. How many of you have been on interviews already? I know we've got one person. Other people in the room? Let's say since you finished your undergraduate degree. Possibly not. Okay, a few people? Also you? Okay. What were those interview experiences like? Would you be willing to share a little bit about how that went for you, what you used to prepare for it?
For my most recent, for my current position, I'm a part-time grad student, so I'm working full-time. But yeah, for my most recent position, I guess this applies for all of them as well. I just really put my research skills to use. As soon as I confirm that I have an interview, I go right to the site. I look up who I'll be meeting with. I'm in marketing and events, so I look up what their plans are, what they've done, and I also think of ideas that I can bring to the table, which would show my enthusiasm and things of that nature. So I think for me, and with every position, it's been research has been the most important thing, and I've sat on the other side of the table as well, and I feel like that's huge, like showing that you put forth that effort. So mostly positive, and in my track record is mostly positive, and I think a good part of that is my experience and also like how much I've researched about the company and shown that I have a great interest in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. And the thing is, often we say research and we think, oh, that's just an academic thing. That's something I'm just going to do in graduate school, and then that's no longer going to be part of my life. But it's an everyday thing in pretty much any job in any field. Having good reading skills, having good writing skills, those will be extremely important in your future, even if that's not in your job description. So don't slough it off and don't minimize the importance of those skills that you're honing while you're in graduate school. Yes?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I've been on hiring committees, like on the other side of the table, and also of course have interviewed myself. And my biggest frustration is when I see like candidates underselling themselves, like just because work wasn't paid, therefore it wasn't real work, which is always really frustrating because you want to help them. You see all these amazing things they've done, particularly people who've had more academic backgrounds on their resume, and they're like, oh, it's just kind of thrown away, and they're focusing maybe on like a job that they have, but might not be as well aligned with like the goals of the organization or specifically the role they're applying for. So I always I just think it's so important to like every experience you have teaches you something, whether or not someone cuts you a paycheck at the end, and very well might help you bring value to a company or just to yourself later on.
Definitely. That's so true. That's so true. Yeah, I think it's really important to stop thinking of school as just, oh, school, whatever. It is something that you can draw on and build off of, whether it was paid, whether it was unpaid. Great. Before we do one final wrap-up activity, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the Educational Resource Center and some of the services that we have available for graduate students. So we're located here in this building, one floor up on the 6th floor. And in addition to workshops like the one that you've attended today, we also offer academic skills advising, where you can meet one-on-one with one of our professional staff members and talk about anything from time management to reading skills to study skills, pretty much anything academics related. But as we just discussed, those academic skills really build out into your future lives. So it's worth taking advantage of these resources while you can get the coaching in it. Another coaching service that we offer is writing assistance. Writing is a big struggle for a lot of people, even in graduate school. So I really encourage you to make use of our tutors who can talk to you about how to structure your arguments, how to self-edit your papers. Wherever you struggle, they're there and ready to help you. And then last but not least, we also offer Language Link, which are informal language discussion groups in a wide variety of languages. So they're open not just to undergraduates and graduate students, but also faculty and staff and even alumni who live in the Boston region. And for those of you who have English as a second language or a third language or fourth language, we also offer Language Link in English. So it can be really helpful for international students who are studying here at BU. So to keep track of our workshops, to find out more about these services, you can use the QR code in the lower right-hand corner of the screen or visit our website. And I also wanted to draw your attention to another office that's in this building, actually right on this floor, and that's the Center for Career Development. They, similar to us, offer one-on-one appointments where you can get help with your cover letters and your resumes and finding that perfect language to talk about your master's thesis project. But they also offer workshops, and I wanted to highlight 2 upcoming workshops in January that are specifically targeted towards the needs of graduate students. So the first one on January 23rd is an introduction to the CCD and how they can help you in your career path. And then the third one is for graduate students that are maybe changing directions a little bit, going in a different direction than they initially anticipated. So both of these should be really, really helpful sessions, and I highly encourage that you visit them and check them out. So to wrap up, I'll leave that slide up. To wrap up, I'd like you to turn back to your neighbors and to talk about what are your next steps after leaving today's workshop? You've got that inventory on your note cards, so what are you going to do next with that? What are you going to do to continue that process of self-exploration and finding that language for your chosen industry? So take a few minutes, check in with your neighbors, and then we'll wrap up. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here this evening and for really engaging in these conversations with your peers. I hope that it was helpful to do that bit of self-reflection on yourself and then also to share experiences with people that are at a similar stage in life. So thank you very much for your attention, and we hope to see you at future workshops next semester. Thank you.